Someone was fiddling with my front door lock using a keyring so massive it looked like it belonged to a car dealership. I heard slow, methodical clicking, like someone was trying every key in existence. Curious, I peeked through the blinds and there she was, bent over the lock, mumbling as if the door had personally insulted her. It wasn't panic, but a kind of calm confidence, as if she owned the place but had just forgotten which key fit which door. At first, I thought maybe she was lost. Then it hit me, no, this woman believed she had every right to be here. Ever witnessed something this bizarre? Tell me what you'd do if someone tried to expertly break into your home. She wore one of those crisply ironed polo shirts that scream, "I'm important around here," and her hair was pulled into a tight bun that basically said, "I want to speak to your manager." I recognized her immediately, Lily Baxter. She had crowned herself queen of our little suburban Texas block after moving in about 8 months ago. From day one, she acted like she owned the whole neighborhood. But what really grabbed my attention as she was trying to open my front door with keys that were definitely not mine. I'd lived in this ranch-style house for 5 years. Bought it myself after retiring early from my plumbing business due to a back injury. I knew exactly who had keys to my place, and she wasn't on that short list. I watched her for maybe 3 or 4 minutes, utterly fascinated. She'd pick a key, jiggle it, mutter curses under her breath, then try the next one. The morning sun beat down on her, sweat forming on her forehead. She was completely absorbed in the task, occasionally glancing around to make sure no one was watching her, which ironically made her look even more suspicious. Every so often she'd shake her head and mutter something I couldn't quite catch through the door. Her body language was a mix of frustration and determination. What made this even more interesting was my son Mike sitting right there in the kitchen, eating cereal and scrolling through his phone. Mike's 26 and a deputy sheriff for our county. He'd been staying with me for the past week while his apartment was getting some work done. He was off duty, dressed casually in jeans and a plain t-shirt, but I could see his cop instincts kicking in. He had noticed the noise too and was listening carefully. When I caught his eye, he raised his eyebrows in silent question. I nodded toward the window and mouthed, "Come look at this." Mike set his spoon down and came over. When he saw Lily hunched over the door with her giant keyring, his expression shifted from casual curiosity to professional focus in an instant. We watched for another minute as she continued her medieval quest for the magic key that would let her inside. That's when I decided I'd seen enough. I calmly walked to the front door, locked the deadbolt from the inside, and swung it open. "Can I help you with something?" I asked, trying to sound as pleasant as possible. Her face when she realized she'd been caught red-handed was priceless, a shock mixed with embarrassment, quickly followed by the defensive anger some people get when they know they're busted but won't admit it. "Oh, Mr. Carter," she stammered, jumping back from the door like it was suddenly electrified. "I was just a broken bar. I'm conducting mandatory safety inspections for the hoe." She straightened up, clutching that enormous keyring like it was some kind of official badge. "All residents are required to allow access for quarterly safety checks. It's in the neighborhood covenant," she said with practiced confidence, though her eyes betrayed her nervousness. The way she gripped those keys so tight her knuckles went white said everything about how real this inspection was. "Safety inspection, huh?" I replied, leaning against the doorframe with my arms crossed. "And you planned to conduct this inspection using someone else's keys?" I nodded toward the giant keyring still clenched in her hand because I was pretty sure none of those keys belonged to me, and I certainly hadn't authorized anyone to enter my house when I wasn't around. The look she gave me was like watching someone realize they're sinking in quicksand. Her mouth opened to respond, then closed, opened again like a fish gasping for air. Behind me, I heard Mike set down his coffee cup and quietly move closer to the door, staying just out of sight. Lily recovered quickly, I'll give her that. In seconds, she switched from embarrassed to indignant. "Mr. Carter, every responsible homeowner in this neighborhood has provided spare keys for emergency situations and safety compliance," she declared. waving her keyring like Excalibur. "I'm the Ho President, and I have the legal authority to ensure all properties meet community standards. If you refuse to cooperate with mandatory inspections, you'll be in violation of multiple neighborhood regulations, and legal action will be pursued." Her transformation was remarkable. She went from court intruder to righteous authority figure in about 10 seconds. As I closed the door and leaned against it, a thought nagged at me. About 2 weeks ago, I'd noticed Lily wandering around my garage with a clipboard, claiming she was inspecting the neighborhood's water mains. At the time, I thought she was just being a concerned neighbor, maybe even appreciated her attention to community infrastructure. Now, thinking back on how she'd lingered near my windows and tested my gate latch, it was clear she'd been casing my place all along. This wasn't some spontaneous power play. She'd been planning her move on me for weeks. 2 hours later, I was enjoying a peaceful cup of coffee on my back porch when I heard a car door slam in the driveway. Through the screen door, I saw Lily marching up the front walkway like she was leading an army. This time, she carried a clipboard and a thick folder of papers. Her earlier embarrassment seemed forgotten. Her earlier embarrassment had completely vanished, replaced now by pure determination. I called out to Mike, who was in the living room. "Hey son, looks like our friend is back for round 2. He appeared right beside me, and together we watched through the screen door as Lily took her position on the front porch. She knocked on the door with a firm, commanding rhythm. This time, she meant business. When I opened the door, she didn't waste a second on small talk. "Mr. Carter, I have here official documentation of multiple violations on your property," she announced, holding up a clipboard like it was a legal summons. "After a thorough exterior inspection this morning, I found 8 separate infractions against our neighborhood standards. You have 24 hours to start correcting them or you'll face fines totaling $2,500. She flipped through the papers with practiced ease, pointing to various supposed offenses against suburban order. "Your mailbox is the wrong shade of black. Your fence is 3 inches taller than allowed. And your garden contains unauthorized plants not on the approved list." I took the documents from her hands and skimmed them, struggling not to laugh at the absurd level of detail she'd poured into this nonsense. Each alleged violation was meticulously photographed, measured, and documented like evidence in a criminal trial. She even noted timestamps and weather conditions for each picture. "Impressive work, Lily," I said, and I meant it. The obsessive attention required to compile this was genuinely remarkable if completely bonkers. "Just one quick question," I continued. "Unless you can show me exactly where I signed an agreement to join your hoe, you're trespassing on private property." I handed the papers back. "Until I see my signature agreeing to these rules, you're just harassing a private citizen." For a moment, the question threw her off balance, but she recovered quickly. "That's irrelevant, Mr. Carter," she said, her voice rising. "When property values are at stake, community standards apply to everyone in the neighborhood no matter when they bought their homes." Her tone grew louder and more aggressive with each word. Then she did something I didn't expect. Her pulled out her phone and started snapping photos of me standing in my own doorway. "I'm documenting your refusal to cooperate," she announced, clicking away like a tabloid photographer. "This behavior will be included in my report to county officials." After she left, issuing dramatic threats about returning with the proper authorities, I decided to take a walk around the neighborhood to clear my head. What I discovered was far more disturbing than Lily's ridiculous violation notices. 3 houses down, I found my neighbor Henry working in his front garden, but something was off. Henry was 72, a widow attending the most beautiful tulip garden I'd ever seen, planted by his late wife 2 decades ago. Now, he was uprooting those tulips with tears in his eyes. "Henry, what are you doing?" I asked, genuinely shocked to see him destroying his wife's memorial garden. He looked up at me, defeated. "Lily told me I had to remove all the tulips because they're not on the approved native plant list," he said, voice shaking. "She said if I didn't comply within 48 hours, the hoe would fine me $500 and hire landscapers to do it at my expense." I thought she was the real authority, Henry added. She had all these official papers and everything. Seeing this gentle old man tear apart his wife's legacy because of Lily's fake authority made my blood boil like nothing had since my military days. Continuing my walk, I stopped at Sarah's house, a single mother of two who worked double shifts as a nurse. She was installing a security camera on her front porch, which seemed odd since our neighborhood was usually very safe. New security upgrade? I asked. Lily told me it's mandatory for all single-parent households to install cameras as part of the Ho Patrol system, Sarah explained, struggling with the mounting hardware. She said it's for neighborhood watch coordination and that I'd be fined if I didn't comply within a week. The cameras cost $400 money Sarah really couldn't spare, but she said she couldn't risk being kicked out of the neighborhood. The pattern was clear. Lily wasn't just targeting me. She was systematically manipulating vulnerable residents throughout the community. By the time I returned home, I'd spoken with 6 neighbors, all with stories about Lily's demands and forced compliance. She'd convinced an elderly couple to repaint their house because their color wasn't on her approved palette. She forced a young family to remove their backyard swing set due to sightline regulations. Worst of all, she'd persuaded several residents to hand over spare keys under various false pretenses: emergency access, safety inspections, insurance requirements. Lily had built an entire empire of control based solely on intimidation and official-looking paperwork. When I told Mike what I'd uncovered, his expression shifted from concerned to alarmed. "Dad, this isn't just harassment anymore," he said. "It's systematic fraud targeting vulnerable people. She's running a full-on con operation on the whole neighborhood." He pulled out his phone and started taking notes as I recounted each story. "We need to document everything before she escalates further," he said. "People like Lily don't stop when challenged, either they double down." Just then, my phone rang. It was Henry, calling to say Lily had just visited him again, asking detailed questions about my daily routine and whether I lived alone. As soon as Lily's car disappeared around the corner, Mike came out of the living room, a thoughtful look on his face. "Dad, we need to talk about this," he said, sitting down on the back porch chair. "That woman has committed several crimes, and she's clearly not done causing trouble." He pulled up the voice recorder app on his phone. "I got most of that conversation on audio," he said, "including her threats about legal action and her admission she's been conducting unauthorized property inspections." Mike's cop training was shining through, a methodical, precise, ready for action. Already thinking 3 steps ahead, Mike and I spent the next hour reviewing everything that had happened. He asked detailed questions about when I bought the property, any Ho paperwork I might have received, and the timeline of Lily's behavior in the neighborhood. "Here's what I think is going on," he said, leaning forward in his chair. "This woman has convinced herself she has authority she doesn't actually possess. She's been using intimidation tactics to bully neighbors into compliance. The key detail, and no pun intended, is that collection of keys she's been using." He pulled up something on his phone. "Dad, it's illegal to have unauthorized copies of someone else's keys. That's considered manufacturing burglary tools, and it's a serious felony." As we strategized, Mike looked at me curiously. "Dad, I've got to ask her, why do you hate Ho so much? I mean, I get that this Lily situation is insane, but you seemed fired up about Ho's long before she showed up harassing you." I set my coffee down and was silent for a moment, memories surfacing I rarely spoke of. "Son, your mother and I had a run-in with an Ho back in Florida, years before you were born. We bought a small house near the coast, and the Ho there was run by people just like Lily, control freaks who acted like they owned everyone else's property. Your mother stressed herself sick dealing with them," I continued, feeling the old anger rise again. "Constant violation notices, arbitrary fines, threats about our garden. She lost sleep worrying about what new rule they'd invent next to torment us." Mike listened closely, finally understanding why this was so personal to me. "Mom ended up in the hospital from stress-related heart problems," I said quietly. "The doctor told us the anxiety triggered a cardiac episode. She never fully recovered from it. We moved away, but the damage was done. Mike reached over and squeezed my shoulder. I never knew it was that bad, Dad. No wonder I'm not backing down from this Lily character, I said. That's why I moved out here after your mom passed. I wanted somewhere quiet, where nobody could tell me what color to paint my mailbox or what flowers to plant. I bought this place specifically because there was no neighborhood association, no busybodies telling me how to live on my own property. Mike nodded. Now I see why this isn't just about property rights for you. It's about protecting the peaceful life you built in memory of Mom. Well, Dad, if this woman thinks she can bully you the same way that Florida Ho bullied Mom, she's got another thing coming. We're going to document everything and stop her before she hurts anyone else the way they hurt our family. We agreed our best move was to document everything and prepare for her promised return with proper authorities. Mike set his phone to record any future conversations, and we double-checked that our doors and windows were securely locked. The thing is, Dad, Mike warned, she's not going to back down easily. People like this, when challenged, tend to escalate instead of retreat. She'll probably come back with even more aggressive tactics. Of course, he was right. We were dealing with someone who'd built her entire identity as the neighborhood enforcer, and admitting she was wrong would mean admitting her whole power structure was a sham. You know what, though, Mike said with a grin, trying to lighten the mood. By tomorrow you're probably going to be the most famous guy in the neighborhood. Either the hero who stood up to the Ho tyrant or the rebel who refused to follow community standards. I couldn't help but laugh. At my age, a little notoriety might be just what I need. Your mother always said I was too quiet for my own good. It felt good to laugh together even in the middle of this stressful mess. The crisis had only strengthened the bond between us, and I was grateful for his support and expertise. That evening around 6, my phone rang. The first call was from an elderly neighbor next door, sounding worried. Mason, Lily stopped by this afternoon asking about you. She wanted to know your work schedule, if you live alone, if you have family visiting. The second call was from another neighbor with a similar story. She's been going door to door telling people you're dangerous and uncooperative, that you threatened her when she was just trying to do her job. By the third call, it was clear Lily was running some kind of campaign to isolate me and build support for whatever she had planned next. Mike listened, growing increasingly concerned. Dad, she's building a narrative, he said after the last call. She's telling everyone you're the problem, are threatening and dangerous. She's setting the stage to justify whatever extreme action she's planning. He looked at me seriously. When someone starts spreading stories about you being dangerous, it usually means they plan to call law enforcement and claim they feel threatened. That gives them an excuse to escalate and maybe even get you arrested on false accusations. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. She was likely planning to call the police on a house where a deputy sheriff was sitting in the kitchen. The next morning started quietly enough, but around 10:30. I spotted Lily's car slowly creeping down our street. She parked a few houses down and sat there for nearly 20 minutes, just watching my house, like she was conducting surveillance. Mike and I watched her from different windows, both knowing she was working up the nerve for whatever she planned next. Finally, she got out and approached my property, but not at the front door this time. Instead, she walked around to the side of the house and started testing the windows. What made it even more disturbing was what she carried along with her clipboard and keyring, a plastic sleeve holding what looked like official documents. I watched in disbelief as she systematically tried every ground floor window, pulling out different keys from her collection, testing locks, even trying to force ones clearly not meant to open from the outside. The most unsettling part was how often she checked that plastic sleeve. When Mike zoomed in with his phone camera, we saw it was a poorly forged property access permit. The so-called authorization form had a Microsoft Word clip art logo of a tree and stars, something no real government agency would ever use. This is incredible, Mike whispered, watching Lily move from the side windows to the back of the house. She's completely lost touch with reality. She actually believes those keys will work on your house. We could hear her muttering to herself as she worked phrases like, "These should work. and everyone else cooperated. It was like watching someone having a one-sided conversation with their own delusions. She tried the back door, the basement windows, even the garage side door. Every failure only seemed to fuel her frustration and determination. Instead of realizing she had no authority, she only doubled down. The most disturbing part was listening to her justify her actions out loud, especially when she started sniffing around the basement windows. Property values depend on compliance, she kept repeating to herself. Everyone has to follow the same rules. At one point, she even got down on her hands and knees, sniffing near a basement window before scribbling notes on her clipboard. "Smells like weed killer down here," she muttered, probably ignoring proper chemical application guidelines. That's a health code violation. The fact that she was analyzing the smell of my lawn care products through my basement windows crossed the line from eccentric to outright creepy stalking. After about 45 minutes of watching this woman attempt to break into my house from every angle while conducting some bizarre environmental inspection, Mike and I realized she wasn't going to give up on her own. She was fully committed to this insane mission and would keep escalating until something stopped her. "Dad, I think we're about to see her nuclear option," Mike said, eyeing Lily as she stomped back to her car, clearly frustrated. "She's failed at intimidation, failed at legal threats, and failed at breaking in. The next step for someone like this is usually calling law enforcement and claiming she's the victim." What made her behavior even more alarming was how methodical she was documenting everything. She wasn't just trying random windows, she was photographing each attempt, measuring distances, and taking notes on everything from my landscaping to the condition of my gutters. "Look at this," Mike said, reviewing the footage he'd captured. "She's building some kind of case file, like she's gathering evidence for a prosecution. This woman has completely convinced herself she's conducting a legitimate investigation." Sure enough, we watched through the window as Lily sat in her car for a few minutes, clearly psyching herself up. She kept glancing between my house and her phone, pulling out that fake authorization document several times, reading it like it would give her courage for whatever she was about to do. Finally, she pulled out her phone and started dialing. Even inside my house, I could hear her voice growing louder and more agitated. We couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakably she was reporting some kind of emergency or threat. Mike looked at me with a mix of professional concern and family protectiveness. "Here we go," he said. "She's calling 911. The irony wasn't lost on us. This woman was about to call the police to report a dangerous man who had threatened her and refused to cooperate with lawful authority. She had no idea that the dangerous man she was reporting was a disabled veteran who just wanted to live quietly, and that his son, a deputy sheriff, was sitting right there in the kitchen finishing his morning coffee. We could see her through the window, gesturing wildly as she talked to the dispatcher, probably describing me as some kind of menace to the community while waving her fake authorization document as proof of her supposed authority. Little did she know her entire story was about to collapse spectacularly. From our vantage point in the kitchen, Mike and I watched Lily in her car, talking animatedly on the phone. Her free hand waved dramatically as she spoke, clearly painting a vivid, dramatic picture for whoever was listening. Mike had changed into a clean button-down shirt, still civilian clothes, but something that looked professional enough if needed. "Dad, when the officers arrive, let me handle the initial contact," he said. "I want to make sure this is done completely by the book." We didn't have to wait long. About 8 minutes later, sirens sounded in the distance, growing louder. Lily jumped out of her car immediately and positioned herself on the sidewalk, pointing dramatically toward my house like she was directing a raid on a dangerous criminal hideout. 2 patrol cars pulled up, and 4 officers got out. I recognized one right away, an officer Mike had introduced me to at a barbecue last summer. The irony kept thickening. Lily rushed over to them, talking rapidly and gesturing urgently toward my house.
Through the window, we could see her giving what looked like a detailed briefing on the threat I supposedly posed. She pointed to various parts of my property, probably describing every violation she'd documented, and occasionally jabbed a finger at my front door. The officers listened politely, but I could see them exchanging skeptical glances. One took notes while another assessed my house with the kind of professional scrutiny that comes from years of responding to domestic calls. "Showtime," Mike said quietly. Straightening his shirt, he calmly walked to the front door and opened it before the officers could even knock. The look on Lily's face when she saw him was priceless, a pure shock, followed by confusion, then dawning horror as her carefully crafted story started to unravel. "Good morning, officers," Mike said in his most professional voice. "I'm Deputy Mike Carter, badge number 4729. I believe you're here about a complaint involving my father." The lead officer's face broke into a small, knowing smile. The lead officer's expression shifted into a surprised smile. "Mike, what are you doing here?" The other officers exchanged confused looks, glancing between Mike and Lily, who stood there with her mouth agape like someone had just told her the earth was flat. "This is my dad's house," Mike explained calmly. "I'm on vacation this week, staying here while my apartment undergoes some work. I understand there's been a complaint filed." He nodded toward Lily, who was still staring at him as if he'd materialized out of thin air. "Wait. This can't be," Lily finally stammered, her voice high-pitched and panicked. "Your father is dangerous. He threatened me. He's been violating neighborhood regulations and refusing to cooperate with lawful authority." She glanced back and forth between Mike and the officers, as if hoping someone would tell her this was all some kind of prank. "You can't just dismiss legitimate complaint because you know him," she insisted. Mike stayed calm and professional. "Ma'am, I'd like to hear more about these threats you mentioned. When exactly did my father threaten you, and what did he say?" His tone was courteous but firm, of the voice of someone who's taken countless statements from agitated citizens. He added, "I'm also curious about your authority to conduct property inspections, and why you have keys to multiple residences in this neighborhood." The officers leaned in, visibly reassessing the situation based on Mike's questions. Lily's story immediately began to unravel under their professional questioning. When pressed for details about the threats, she couldn't provide any specific language, only vague claims of intimidation and refusal to cooperate. Asked about her authority to inspect properties, she waved around her homemade documents and talked about community standards but couldn't cite any actual legal basis. When the lead officer requested to see her set of keys, her face drained of color. Those are for emergency purposes," she stammered. "Neighbors gave them to me voluntarily, for safety reasons." "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see those keys," the officer said, his tone shifting from casual to official. "Unauthorized possession of keys to other people's property is a serious crime. We've had reports of suspicious activity in this neighborhood." Reluctantly, Lily handed over a massive keyring. The officers inspected it with obvious concern as there were at least 20 keys, representing multiple properties. "Can you provide documentation showing you were properly authorized to have each of these keys?" the officer asked. "And can you explain why you tried to use them to enter Mr. Carter's residence without permission?" The sight of Mike, in plain clothes yet clearly comfortable in the house and obviously the homeowner's son, had completely dismantled Lily's narrative of a dangerous, threatening resident needing law enforcement intervention. But she wasn't done. "Officers, I don't care who his son is," she said, her voice growing more desperate with each word. "I have documented evidence of multiple violations of neighborhood standards, and this man has refused to cooperate with mandatory safety inspections. Community property values are at risk." She waved her clipboard as if it were some kind of legal authority that could trump an actual police officer. The lead officer examined the keys with a furrowed brow. "Ma'am, I count 23 keys here. That's a lot of emergency access for one person." He looked to Mike. "Deputy Carter, has your father reported any attempted break-ins or suspicious activity?" Mike nodded, pulling out his phone. "Yes, I've documented several incidents over the past few days where this woman has tried to gain unauthorized entry to my father's home using various keys from the collection." He showed the officers recorded footage of Lily trying different windows and doors, clear evidence of her systematically attempting to break in. "Ma'am, this video shows you trying to enter Mr. Carter's residence without permission," the lead officer said, now fully serious. "Can you explain why you believed you had the right to do so?" Lily's face flushed in stages as she watched herself on the phone screen. "Those weren't break-ins. Those were legitimate safety inspections. I have authority to ensure compliance with neighborhood standards." "And where exactly does that authority come from?" the second officer asked. "Do you have documentation proving legal jurisdiction over Mr. Carter's property?" Lily fumbled through her folder, pulling out papers and waving them around. "I am the Ho president. I was elected by the neighborhood. Property values depend on everyone following the same rules." But when pressed to produce actual legal documents establishing an Ho with jurisdiction over Mike's property, she could offer nothing more substantial than homemade violation reports and some printed emails from neighbors. The more questions the officers asked, the clearer it became that Lily's entire authority was imaginary. She'd never been officially elected to anything. She had simply declared herself president of a homeowners association that didn't exist legally. The neighborhood standards she referenced were rules she'd made up and printed on official-looking letterhead. And those 23 keys? They represented a deliberate campaign of manipulation aimed at vulnerable neighbors who trusted her supposed authority. Mike provided contact information for several neighbors who had been approached by Lily. Another officer started making calls. The disturbing pattern emerged. Lily targeted elderly residents, people recovering from illness, and new homeowners unsure about neighborhood procedures. She convinced them to hand over spare keys by claiming it was for insurance requirements, emergency preparedness, or community safety. Some people had given. Some neighbors had handed over their keys months ago and completely forgotten about it until the police started making calls. The officer reported that an elderly woman 4 houses down had given Lily a key 8 months prior, when she was recovering from hip surgery. She thought it was part of some official neighborhood watch program, he explained after finishing his calls. Another neighbor, a man who lived across the street, had handed over his key when he first moved in because Lily told him it was required for his homeowner's insurance to be valid. The full scope of Lily's deception was becoming painfully clear, and it extended far beyond her attempts to get into my house. For months, she had been systematically collecting access to people's homes under the false pretense of official authority she never actually had. As the officers continued their investigation, Lily's desperation grew. "You don't understand," she pleaded, her voice trembling with urgency. "Property values in this neighborhood are dropping because people won't keep proper standards. Someone has to be responsible for the community's appearance and safety. If everyone just does whatever they want, this whole area will turn into a slum." Her sincere belief in her mission was almost touching if it weren't so completely delusional. She truly thought she was saving the neighborhood from chaos and decay. What made Lily's delusion even more unsettling was when one of the officers asked about the fake authorization document she'd presented. "Ma'am, where did you get this official form?" he asked, holding up the plastic sleeve. Lily's face lit up with pride. "I designed it myself," she announced. "I used templates from the internet. I researched proper government formatting and official language. It took me weeks to get the letterhead just right." The officers exchanged incredulous looks as she essentially admitted to forging official documents. "I even laminated it," she added, oblivious to how deeply she was digging her legal hole, so it would look more professional during inspections. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when the lead officer ran a background check. "Ma'am, I see here that you were previously issued a restraining order in Harris County for harassment of neighbors and fraudulent claims of authority," he said, reading from his screen. "You were banned from acting as an HO representative after multiple complaints about intimidation tactics and abuse of power." Lily's face went pale as her past caught up with her. "That was different," she insisted. "Those people didn't understand the importance of community standards. They were just as selfish and uncooperative as him." She gestured at me like I was the source of all the neighborhood's problems. While the officers processed this new information, Mike quietly pulled one of his colleagues aside. "Given her prior record and the systematic nature of these crimes, you might want to request a search warrant for her residence sooner rather than later," he said quietly. "People like this often destroy evidence once they realize they're caught. Phones, computers, files. The sooner we can secure her property, the stronger our case." The officer nodded appreciatively. "Good thinking, Carter. I'll call it in now." It was impressive watching Mike maintain his professional demeanor while contributing crucial insight to protect the investigation's integrity. The officers had heard enough. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for criminal trespass, attempted burglary, fraud, and filing a false police report," the lead officer announced, producing his handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As they read her rights and cuffed her, Lily continued protesting her innocence and the importance of her mission. "You're making a huge mistake," she insisted. "Property values will plummet without proper oversight. The neighborhood needs leadership." Even as she was loaded into the back of a patrol car, she insisted she was the victim of a misunderstanding. Mike handled the entire situation with flawless professionalism, giving official statements and making sure all evidence was thoroughly documented. The other officers were visibly impressed with how he managed the investigation, while carefully maintaining appropriate boundaries given his family connection. "Your son did excellent work on this case," the lead officer told me as they prepared to leave. "He documented everything properly and never overstepped his authority." This woman could have caused serious problems for a lot of people if this pattern had continued. As the patrol cars drove away with Lily in custody, "Something beautiful happened in our neighborhood." Word spread quickly about the police activity, and within an hour, neighbors began gathering on my front lawn not as an angry mob, but as a community suddenly freed from a quiet oppression they hadn't fully realized. Henry was the first to arrive. When he saw me, tears welled in his eyes. "Mason, I can't believe what she put us through," he said, dabbing his eyes with a handkerchief. "She told me if I didn't remove my wife's tulips, she'd have landscapers destroy Thelma and then charge me. I spent all night pulling up 20 years of Margaret's work." Stories poured out, a heartbreaking and infuriating in equal measure. Sarah, a single mother with 2 young kids, explained how Lily had convinced her that security cameras were legally required. "I worked extra shifts for 2 weeks to afford those cameras," she said. "I was terrified of getting evicted if I didn't comply." One elderly couple down the street revealed that Lily had actually entered their home while the husband was napping, claiming it was a routine safety inspection. "I woke up to find her in my living room, taking pictures of our furniture," the man said, still shaken. "She said our couch placement was a fire hazard." Perhaps the most disturbing revelation came from a young father who'd moved in about 3 months ago. Lily told me that families with children had to install playground equipment that met specific host standards. The young father explained, when he couldn't afford the $1,500 swing set she recommended, she said his kids weren't allowed to play in their own backyard. His 8-year-old daughter tugged on his sleeve and added, "The mean lady said I couldn't play hopscotch on the sidewalk because it made chalk marks." The fact that this woman had been terrorizing children with her made-up rules made my blood boil all over again. As more neighbors shared their stories, a clear pattern of psychological manipulation emerged. Lily had targeted each person's particular vulnerabilities, the elderly with fears about safety and compliance, new residents uncertain about neighborhood rules, single parents worried about providing for their children, and families concerned about fitting into the community. She had methodically identified what mattered most to each individual and then weaponized those concerns to control their behavior. It was a sophisticated form of emotional manipulation disguised as community leadership. The investigation that followed uncovered the full extent of Lily's operation. Police found detailed files in her home containing photographs of various properties, notes on residents' schedules, and plans for enforcement actions that bordered on stalking. She'd been entering people's homes when they were away, taking pictures of anything she deemed a violation, and building cases for fines and penalties that had no legal standing. Some neighbors discovered personal belongings had been moved or that their homes had been inspected without their knowledge. The invasion of privacy and breach of trust was staggering. The legal consequences were swift and just. Lily was convicted on multiple counts: burglary, criminal trespass, fraud, and harassment. The judge was particularly harsh in sentencing due to the calculated nature of her crimes and her targeting of vulnerable residents. She was sentenced to 18 months in jail, ordered to pay restitution to all affected homeowners, and banned from any future involvement in neighborhood associations or property management. Her conviction also nullified any claim she had to authority. officially dismantling the fake host structure she built for our neighborhood. Lily's arrest was like lifting a dark cloud that none of us had realized was hanging over the community. Neighbors who had once been afraid to paint their shutters or plant flowers suddenly felt free to truly make their properties their own again. Henry immediately began replanting his wife's tulip garden, and the entire community pitched in to help recreate Margaret's memorial garden from old photographs. Sarah returned the expensive security cameras and used that money for her kids' school supplies instead. The young father built a simple tire swing for his daughter, who happily resumed her hopscotch games on the sidewalk. Mike received a commendation from the sheriff's department for his professional handling of the case, which became a training example for investigating systematic fraud and abuse of authority claims. More importantly, the whole ordeal brought us closer as father and son. Sitting on the porch that evening, watching our neighbors finally relax and enjoy their homes, I put my hand on Mike's shoulder. "Mike, you didn't just protect your old man today," I told him. "You protected this entire little community. You gave these people their peace back." He smiled and squeezed my hand. "Dad, watching you stand up to her inspired me. You showed me that sometimes the most important battles are the ones you fight in your own backyard." The last I heard, Lily was trying to appeal her conviction, arguing that she was only trying to help the neighborhood maintain proper standards. Apparently, she still doesn't understand that good intentions don't excuse criminal behavior, and that true authority comes from legitimate sources and not from forging official documents and intimidating your neighbors. As for me, I'm back to enjoying my peaceful retirement at my ranch house, with my original locks, my own keys, and the satisfaction of knowing that sometimes justice really does prevail when good people stand up to bullies. Today, whenever I wash dishes at my kitchen sink, I glance out at my front door and remember the image of Lily, hunched over it with her ridiculous collection of fake master keys. It's a reminder that the most dangerous people are often those who convince themselves their personal mission justifies violating others' rights. But it also reminds me that truth, patience, and a little bit of law enforcement know-how can go a long way toward setting things right when someone abuses the power they think they have. That's a wrap from Just Story S, but don't go far. There's plenty more drama, twists, and unbelievable stories waiting for you on our A Broken Bar.